A sharp, collective gasp rippled from the ballroom entrance. Yuhua turned from her circle of the city's wealthiest wives, her champagne glass freezing halfway to her lips. The opulent charity gala had gone dead silent. All chatter evaporated. Every eye in the room pivoted to the top of the grand staircase, and Yuhua's blood ran cold. Sandra, the quiet, unassuming woman who scrubbed her floors and polished her husband's silver in a drab gray uniform, stood there, radiating a commanding presence that made every socialite in the room look instantly cheap. She was draped in a breathtaking, floor-length gown of emerald green sequins that caught the chandelier light like liquid fire. Is that the legendary Milan exclusive? A diamond-clad guest nearby whispered frantically. That custom couture is worth at least $2 million. The crystal flute slipped from Yuhua's fingers, shattering into pieces against the polished floor. No, 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 this couldn't be happening. She had invited Sandra as a cruel prank, a twisted game meant to entertain the elite and humiliate the help. Yuhua had sneered, telling her to just wear whatever you have, fully expecting the maid to cower in the corner in threadbare clothes, entirely out of her depth. Not this, not a gown worth more than her husband's offshore accounts. Sandra descended the steps with devastating, deliberate elegance, like she had walked these red carpets 1,000 times before. A flawless diamond necklace rested against her collarbone, catching the light perfectly, and her hair was swept into an immaculate, regal updo. She didn't look like a maid, she looked like a queen coming to reclaim her empire, and she was walking straight toward Yuhua. 3 days earlier, the air in Yua's palatial walk-in closet was thick with the scent of tuberose and expensive leather. Sandra knelt on the plush cream carpet, quietly arranging rows of red-soled stilettos. She wore the drab gray uniform of the estate staff, her expression carefully neutral as she worked. "Careful with those," a sharp, musical voice snapped from the doorway. Yuhua swept into the room, a silk dressing gown trailing behind her. She held a crystal glass of sparkling water, her eyes narrowing as she looked down her nose at the woman on the floor. "Those cost more than your life." "Yes, ma'am," Sandra murmured, keeping her head bowed. She placed a pair of jewel-encrusted heels perfectly into their velvet-lined cubby. Yuhua stepped closer, her gaze drifting deliberately from her own manicured toes down to Sandra's scuffed, practical black work shoes. A cruel, delighted smile curled her lips. She leaned against the central island, swirling her water. "Tell me, Sandra, do they even sell those in actual stores, or do you have to salvage them from the side of the road?" Sandra paused, her fingers brushing the soft suede of a designer boot. For a fleeting second, she thought of her own private collection in Paris, of the bespoke shoemakers who regularly flew to her family's estate. She swallowed the truth and replied evenly, "They are comfortable for standing, ma'am." Yuhua laughed, a high, brittle sound. "Comfortable? How tragic." An idea seemed to spark in her dark eyes, malicious and bright. She tapped her manicured nails against her glass. "You know, my husband is hosting the city's annual charity gala this Saturday. It's a highly exclusive event, the kind of room where fortunes are made and lost, the real elite." Sandra stood, dusting off her apron. "I will ensure the silver is polished for the after-party, ma'am." "No," Yuhua purred, her smile widening into something predatory. "I want you to attend as a guest." Sandra blinked, feigning surprise. "Ma'am?" "Consider it a charitable act on my part, a glimpse into how the other half lives. It will be so amusing to have you there. Just wear whatever you have. I'm sure it will be fine." The trap was entirely transparent. Yuhua wanted a court jester, a living prop to highlight her own immense wealth while subjecting Sandra to the whispers and sneers of the city's most ruthless socialites. It was a calculated public humiliation designed for her own entertainment.
Sandra looked at the woman who had casually tormented her and the rest of the staff for the past year. A quiet, dangerous resolve settled in her chest. Her year-long social experiment was officially over. It was time to remind the wife of a local don what real, untouchable power actually looked like. "Thank you, ma'am," Sandra said, softly, lowering her eyes to hide the sharp fire igniting within them. "I will find something appropriate to wear."
That evening, in the sterile silence of her cramped staff quarters, Sandra sat on the edge of her narrow cot and looked at her hands. They were raw from industrial cleaners, the skin around her nails ragged from a year of scrubbing marble that never seemed to stay clean. To Yuhua, these were the hands of a servant, a woman born to be invisible. In reality, these were the hands of Sandra Thorne, the sole heir to a diamond dynasty that stretched from the mines of Botswana to the high-end boutiques of Place Vendôme. 12 months ago, she had walked away from a world of private jets and suffocating privilege. Her father, a man who controlled 40% of the world's rough diamond trade, had called her social experiment a fool's errand. He believed that without the Thorne name, she was nothing but a delicate bird in a gilded cage. Sandra had set out to prove him wrong. She wanted to know if she possessed a core that wasn't defined by her net worth, if she could survive, work, and exist as a nobody in a world that only valued somebodies. She had spent a year living on a fraction of a maid's wage, biting her tongue through the verbal abuse of women like Yuhua, and learning the bitter weight of being overlooked. She had succeeded. She had survived. She had found a resilience in herself that no amount of finishing schools could have taught her. But Yuhua's latest invitation wasn't just an insult, it was a symptom of a deeper rot. Sandra had watched this woman and her husband, the Don, use their power to grind down anyone they deemed beneath them. She had seen the way they treated the invisible people, the drivers, the cooks, the cleaners, as if they were disposable objects rather than human beings. She realized then that the experiment didn't have to end in a quiet exit. If she was going to return to her throne, she wouldn't do it as a girl who had merely found herself. She would do it as a woman who used her father's formidable shadow to cast a light on the cruelty of the people who thought they ruled this city. The invisible year was over. The Thorne heiress was coming back, and she was bringing the full weight of her legacy with her. She reached into her small, battered trunk and pulled out a burner phone she hadn't touched in months. She dialed a number that bypassed assistants and secretaries, ringing directly into a high-rise office in London. "It's me," Sandra said, her voice dropping the humble cadence of a servant and regaining the sharp, crystalline authority of a queen. "I need my concierge, and I need the emeralds." The phone rang only once before a voice answered, crisp, British, and impeccably professional. "Thorne Private Logistics, Marcus speaking." Sandra leaned back against the peeling wallpaper of her tiny room, a ghost of a smile playing on her lips. For a year she had been the help, the girl, or simply ignored entirely. Hearing a voice that recognized her as a person, and more than that, a power, was like taking a first breath of oxygen after being underwater. "Marcus," she said, her voice dropping into a low, velvet-smooth register that would have made Yuhua's blood run cold. "It's Sandra. Verify authorization code Alpha 9 Thorne 07. There was a momentary silence, then the sound of rapid typing. When Marcus spoke again, the professional distance was replaced by an audible sense of relief. "Miss Thorne, your father has had us on standby for 12 months. He'll be pleased to know you've decided to come home." "I haven't decided to come home yet, Marcus, but I have decided that I am finished being invisible." She stood up, pacing the small space of her room. "I'm in the city. There is a gala this Saturday at the Grand Hyatt. I need the full weight of the family office behind me for the next 48 hours. "Consider it done, Miss Thorne. What are your requirements?" Sandra's eyes landed on the stained gray uniform she had draped over a chair,
A year of silence, of swallowed insults, and of watching Yuhua treat human beings like disposable napkins. It was time for a reckoning. "I need the emerald sequin couture from the Milan private collection," she commanded, choosing the most vibrant, defiant color she owned to contrast the dull life she was leaving behind. "I want the thorn teardrop emeralds, the ones my mother wore to the Louvre. And I need a security detail, a mobile styling unit, and a private floor at the St. Regis. I want them moved in tonight, under total radio silence. No one in this city can know I'm here until I walk through those ballroom doors. The emerald dress is currently in climate-controlled storage in Paris, miss," his voice already gaining the clipped cadence of someone moving mountains. "It will be on a private jet within the hour. The stylists and security will meet you at the extraction point at midnight." "Good," Sandra said, her heart hammering with a cold, sharp excitement. "And Marcus, one more thing. I need a full dossier on the Don's offshore accounts and his wife's recent social expenditures. If Yuhua wants a show, I'm going to give her a performance she'll never forget." She hung up the phone and looked at her reflection in the cracked mirror. The maid was gone, the heiress had returned, and she was coming for everything.
At precisely midnight, a matte black SUV with tinted windows idled at the edge of the estate's service road, its engine a low, predatory hum. Sandra slipped through the servants' entrance one last time, a ghost in the shadows. As she climbed into the leather interior, the driver didn't offer a nod of pity or a command to hurry. He simply whispered, "Welcome back, Miss Thorne," and accelerated into the night. The transformation took place in the presidential suite of the St. Regis, a space that cost more per night than Sandra had earned in her entire year of service. A team of 4, the world's most elite stylists and makeup artists, was already waiting. They didn't see a maid, they saw a masterpiece in need of unveiling. "The skin is dehydrated from harsh chemicals," the lead aesthetician noted, her voice a mix of professional concern and reverence. "But the bone structure is unmistakable, pure Thorne heritage." Sandra stood in the center of the room and unbuttoned the drab, gray cotton uniform. It fell to the floor in a lifeless heap, a crumpled skin she was finally shedding. She stepped away from it without a backward glance, leaving the Sandra the Help persona behind on the carpet. After a year of lukewarm showers in a communal bathroom, the scent of expensive French oils and the touch of silk against her skin felt like a homecoming. Then came the centerpiece. 2 stylists carefully unboxed the emerald green gown. It was a marvel of engineering and art. Millions of hand-stitched sequins designed to catch the light like a deep-sea current. It wasn't just a dress, it was a $2 million statement of war. As they cinched the bodice, the weight of the fabric reminded her of who she was. She wasn't just surviving, she was reigning. Finally, the thorn teardrop emeralds were fastened around her neck. The stones were cold, heavy, and brilliant, glowing with a green fire that matched the defiance in her eyes. Her hair was swept into an intricate regal updo that elongated her neck, making her look inches taller than she had in her scuffed work shoes. When the stylists finally stepped back, the woman in the mirror was unrecognizable from the one who had scrubbed Yuha's closet 48 hours ago. Gone was the downward gaze and the folded hands. In her place stood a titan of industry's daughter, armored in couture and radiating a terrifying, quiet power. "The car is downstairs, Miss Thorne," Marcus's voice came through the suite's intercom. Sandra picked up a small beaded clutch, her movements fluid and practiced. She looked at her reflection one last time, at the sharp jawline and the eyes that held a year's worth of secrets. "Let's go," she said, her voice a cool blade of silk. "I have a party to attend." The silence in the Grand Hyatt ballroom was heavy, a suffocating blanket that dampened even the sound of the ventilation system. Sandra moved through the frozen crowd with a grace that felt predatory. The parting of the guests was instinctive. They didn't just move out of her way, they cleared a path as if for a visiting sovereign. Yuhua stood at the center of the wreckage she had made. Shards of crystal lay scattered around her designer heels, sparkling like pathetic imitations of the stones hanging from Sandra's neck. Her face was a mask of sheer, unadulterated terror, the look of a woman who had realized, too late, that she had been playing a game with a lioness while believing she was taunting a house cat. Sandra stopped exactly 3 feet from her former employer. Up close, the contrast was devastating. Yuhua's frantic, heavy makeup looked like a desperate shield compared to Sandra's luminous, effortless glow. "Yuhua," Sandra said. Her voice wasn't loud, but in the vacuum of the room it carried to every corner. It was cool, cultured, and devoid of the submissive lilt she had used for a year. Yuhua's throat worked, but no sound came out. Her eyes darted from the $2 million emerald gown to the thorn teardrop jewels, then back to Sandra's face. She finally managed to choke out, her voice a thin, ragged thread. What is this?" Sandra offered a thin, enigmatic smile. She reached out and gently adjusted a stray lock of hair near Yuhua's ear, a gesture of mock intimacy that made the other woman flinch. "I wanted to thank you," Sandra whispered, though the words were clear to the circling elite. "I took your advice to heart. You told me to wear whatever I had and to make sure it was appropriate for the company I'd be keeping." She paused, her gaze sweeping over the shimmering green sequins. "I realized that if I were to stand in a room full of people who value nothing but labels and legacies, I should finally show you mine." A ripple of whispers broke the silence like a sudden rainstorm. "Who is she? Did you see those emeralds? Those aren't rentals. I recognize that profile. Is that a thorn?" Yuhua's husband, the Don, began to push through the crowd, his face a cocktail of confusion and growing alarm. But Sandra didn't look at him. Her eyes remained locked on Yuhua, watching as the woman's social armor didn't just crack, it disintegrated. "The help is here, Yuhua," Sandra said softly, her smile widening just a fraction. "And I think it's time we discussed the state of your house."
"Is this a joke?" Yuhua hissed, her voice cracking as she tried to reclaim a shred of her vanished authority. "Where did you steal these things? Which one of my husband's associates did you—" "Enough!" A booming, cultured voice cut through her screeching. An elderly man with silver hair and a chest full of honorary medals stepped into the circle. It was Julian Vane, the patriarch of the city's banking sector, and a man whose favor determined the survival of every business in the room. He ignored Yuhua entirely, his eyes fixed on Sandra with genuine shock and profound respect. "My dear girl," Vane said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute truth. "I haven't seen you since the winter gala in Zurich. We all wondered where Arthur had hidden you away this year." He turned to the crowd, his expression shifting to one of mild amusement. "I assume you all know Miss Sandra Thorne, the heiress to the Thorne Diamond Group. Her father's company practically owns the ground this hotel is built on." The room didn't just go silent, the air seemed to leave it entirely. The whispers didn't just stop, they transformed into a frantic, terrified shuffle as people realized who they had been ignoring. The revelation hit the ballroom like a physical blow. Yuha's face went from pale to a sickly, translucent gray. The women who had stood by her side moments ago, the ones who had laughed at the maid in the closet only days earlier, simultaneously took a step back, physically distancing themselves from a woman who had just committed social suicide. In this world, to insult a servant was a common cruelty. To humiliate the daughter of the world's most powerful diamond tycoon was a death sentence. "Sandra, I didn't know," Yuhua stammered, her voice high and thin. She reached out a trembling hand as if to catch a falling glass, her eyes darting around for a friendly face, but she found only cold, averted gazes. Sandra didn't even look at the hand. She looked through Yuhua, as if the woman had already become the invisible ghost she had tried to make Sandra to be. "That is the problem, isn't it, Yuhua?" Sandra said, her voice a cool, final chime. You only see people when you think they can do something for you. You never thought to look at the person actually holding the tray. Around them, the elite socialites began to turn their backs on Yuha, their eyes already seeking Sandra's favor with desperate, sycophantic smiles. The transition was instantaneous and brutal. Yuha was no longer the hostess or the Don's powerful wife. She was a pariah standing in a field of broken glass, completely alone in a room full of people.
The Don, a man named Minho who usually moved through the city with the heavy, unchallenged step of a predator, finally broke through the inner circle. He had been across the room when the name Thorn hit the air like a gunshot, echoing off the marble and silencing the band. He saw his wife, Yuha, trembling in the center of the floor. He saw Julian Vane, a man who usually ignored Minho's calls, bowing his head in genuine deference to the Maid. Minho's face didn't just pale, it turned a bruised, mottled purple. He wasn't thinking about the gala or the social scandal anymore. He was thinking about the $300 million credit line he currently had pending with a Thorn-affiliated bank. He was thinking about the precious cargo his shipping fleet moved, half of which relied on the Thorn family's global signatures. Yuha, he growled, the word vibrating with a low-frequency rage that made the guests nearby flinch. Tell me you didn't. Yuha looked at him, her eyes wide and wild, her carefully applied lashes fluttering in panic. Minho, she was the girl from the hallway. She was the one who scrubbed the... Silence. He didn't shout, but the command was absolute. He turned to Sandra, his posture shifting from aggressive power to a sickeningly desperate supplication. It was the movement of a man watching his empire crumble in real time. Miss Thorne, he began, his voice strained and unnaturally high. My wife, she has a clumsy, misguided sense of humor. There has been a monumental misunderstanding. We had no idea you were conducting an experiment, Sandra interrupted. She didn't look at him. She looked at the shattered remains of Yuha's dignity on the floor. I wasn't the only one conducting an experiment, Mr. Kang. Your wife was testing how much cruelty a person can endure before they break. It turns out, I don't break. I just remember. The Don felt a cold sweat prickle his hairline. He grabbed Yuha's arm, his fingers digging into her expensive silk with a bruising grip. Apologize, he hissed into her ear, loud enough for the first 3 rows of socialites to hear. Beg her. Yuha looked at Sandra, then at the room of people who were already deleting her from their digital lives. The man she feared most in the world was shaking with a terror she had never seen. She had played a game with a maid and accidentally ignited a war that would consume her husband's life's work. Sandra simply turned her back on them, the emerald sequins shimmering like cold, hard scales. Don't bother. Some things even a Dawn can't fix.
The following evening, the rain fell in a gray, relentless curtain over the city's industrial district. Sandra sat in her small, sparsely furnished apartment, the same one she had occupied for nearly a year. The $2 million emerald gown was gone, returned to its climate-controlled vault, and she was back in a simple linen robe. But the air in the room had changed. The humble walls no longer felt like a hiding place, but a command center. A hesitant, rhythmic knocking sounded at the door. Sandra didn't move for a long moment, letting the silence stretch until the knocking came again, softer, more desperate this time. She opened the door to find Yuhua standing in the dim hallway. The woman was unrecognizable. The polished socialite who had once stood in a $50,000 dressing gown was gone. Yuhua's hair was limp from the rain, her expensive coat was stained, and her eyes were rimmed with a raw, puffy red. She looked fragile, stripped of the husband who had spent the morning frantically trying to liquidate assets, and the friends who had blocked her number before the gala was even over. "Sandra," she whispered. The name sounded foreign in her mouth, stripped of the sharp, condescending edge it had carried for months. Sandra leaned against the doorframe, her expression unreadable. "You're a long way from the penthouse, Yuhua." Yuhua didn't snap back. She didn't offer a hollow excuse or a check signed by her husband. Instead, she let out a jagged, broken breath. "He's leaving me," she said, her voice barely audible over the rain hitting the window at the end of the hall. "The banks froze the accounts this morning. He says I'm a liability, that I ruined him." She looked down at her hands, which were shaking. For the first time, she wasn't looking for a stain on the floor or a missed spot on the silver. She was looking at the void of her own life. "I didn't come here because he told me to beg," Yuhua said, her voice cracking. "I came because, when I saw you on those stairs, I didn't just see an heiress. I saw the person I'd been trying to drown for a year. I was cruel because I liked the way it made me feel powerful. And now I have nothing. I'm sorry, not for the money or the scandal, but for being the kind of person who could look at another human being and see nothing." It was a real apology, unpolished, painful, and devoid of pride. Sandra watched her, the silence between them heavy with the memory of 100 small cruelties. "The experiment is over for both of us then," Sandra said quietly. She didn't offer her hand, and she didn't invite her in. Redemption wasn't that simple, but she didn't close the door with malice either. "Go home, Yuhua, or whatever is left of it. Start figuring out who you are when you're not standing on someone else's neck."
1 week later, the towering glass facade of the Thorn Global Headquarters caught the morning sun, reflecting a brilliance that felt earned rather than merely bought. Sandra stood in the executive boardroom on the top floor, her hands resting on the edge of a mahogany table that had seen a century of dynastic power. She wasn't wearing sequins today. She wore a sharp, charcoal gray tailored suit, the modern armor of a woman who had seen the world from the bottom and was now ready to lead it from the top. Her father sat at the far end of the table, his eyes reflecting a new, quiet pride. He had seen the headlines. He had seen the Dawn's empire dismantled by the mere whisper of her name. "You proved your point, Sandra," he said, his voice gravelly but warm. "The experiment was a success. You survived. Now, shall we return to business as usual?" Sandra looked out the floor-to-ceiling windows, her gaze drifting toward the city's skyline, where thousands of people were currently beginning their shifts in kitchens, closets, and boiler rooms. "No," she said, her voice steady and resonant. "Not as usual. I didn't just survive the year, Father. I saw the rot in the foundation." She turned back to the board members, her expression radiating a clarity that silenced the room. "We are launching the Foundation for the Invisible. It will not be a typical charity. It will be a comprehensive initiative focused on legal protection, wage equity, and educational advancement for the service workers who keep this city running. We will start with a massive audit of every firm we partner with. If they treat their staff like Yuhua treated her housekeepers, we pull our capital immediately." The room was silent, the weight of her words settling into the polished wood. Sandra wasn't just returning to her legacy, she was redefining it. She thought of the women she had shared tea with in the damp staff breaks, the men who drove the cars and were never looked in the eye. She was no longer just the Thorn heiress, she was their voice. As she stepped out onto the balcony of her family's estate that evening, the air felt different, cleaner, lighter. She pulled her phone from her pocket and looked at a photo she had taken on her final day as a maid, her scuffed black work shoes sitting next to the $2 million emerald gown. She deleted the photo. She didn't need the reminder anymore. The invisible girl was gone, but the lessons she had learned were now etched into the very fabric of the Thorn Empire. Sandra breathed in the cool night air, finally home, but with a mission that stretched far beyond the gilded gates of her past. The social experiment was over, but her real work was just beginning. From the shadows of the servants' quarters to the heights of a diamond empire, Sandra's journey reminds us that true power isn't just about what you wear, it's about who you are when no one is looking. But as Yuhua learned the hard way, the people you think are invisible are often the ones holding all the cards. If you enjoyed this story of hidden identities and ultimate justice, make sure to smash that like button and subscribe to the channel so you never miss a new chapter. Before you go, I want to hear from you. What would you do if you found out your maid was actually a billionaire? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and let me know where in the world you're watching from. Thanks for being part of the story. I'll see you in the next one.